I honestly don't know how to even start this book. This is a story that shifts a whole world, moves an in-world religion into an entirely new era, and a story powerful enough, a novel powerful enough to make it believable. And I did not think this was possible. I did not expect it, and I felt so much pressure planning this out, but I think I might have a wrap on this now. So this will be a spoiler-free review of Who Fears Death. This book is stunning. It's brilliant. It's fantasy and sci-fi and a Bildungsroman coming-of-age story about a woman in Africa. And it's really powerful, but it's also really heavy. This is completely, without question, 5 stars. I don't know if I've ever felt a story be... I don't even know how to describe it. It was powerful, viscerally powerful, as if this story needs to exist. It cannot not be true. This is not a book that you read for fun. It's heavy and it gets dark at times, and I think you need to be prepared to approach a book like this. I was not. I was surprised. I was stunned. So going into this review, I would just like to give a trigger warning. Trigger warnings for sexual assault, domestic abuse, incest, violence, female circumcision, and honestly, combinations of those. This book is heavy and it's dark, but it's also really real. It's raw and it gets ugly at times, but it kind of makes sense for this world. So, okay. So that was your trigger warning. As I said, there will be no spoilers in this review, but you have your trigger warning because this book is not for everyone. This book's power comes from its themes. It's completely theme driven. It's pushed by that theme. It's shoved by it. And I don't want to call it feminist because this is not feminism. Feminism is too Western a word to describe the deep delve into female, being powerful and female. This is African womanhood, and it's not like anything you'll find in Europe. In the same way that a lot of our stories, especially fantasies, are very Eurocentric and it assumes that European context, this book is seeped in African context, African womanhood. And I think that makes it obviously unique to anything I've ever read. And I think that really adds to that power because it's something I can recognize. Even though, like, most of this is not something I've really experienced, but these are stories about I can recognize as from my people, from Africa. And I think this is, I would say, for every like African woman to read if you're tough enough to handle this, because it gets really heavy. Our main character is Onyesunwu, and she defines that African womanhood. The womanhood is the heart of her personal struggle, and the African aspects is the heart of the plot struggle. So the character and the plot work together to build this theme perfectly, and it intermingles, and it's really powerful. This book is powerful, the themes in here are powerful, and there's no way I could put it as well as this book did. But I want to go into a couple of them, and I just want you all to be prepared. So, I think it's about the opening scene of the book. Our main character, Onyesunwu's mother, gets raped. And it's honestly the best, it's the driving force of the story, but it's also the best rape I've ever read. And it sounds really weird to say, but it was powerful, and almost want to describe it as being blood. It was real and warm and brutal. And still within that very physical, very, it's almost practical act, there's also the metaphor of her mother screaming and then permanently losing her voice. The book uses some description of how she screamed and the wind took her voice away from her. And from then on, for the rest of the story, she can never speak above a whisper because she's lost her voice. And that's the lasting impact of the rape in more ways than one. It's not fetishized, but you're with her in it. You can feel her pain, you can feel the suffering, you can feel the betrayal and the disgust. And afterwards, she just wants to die. She doesn't want to go on. And it was the most meaningful rape scene that I've ever had. There was nothing cheap about this. This was probably the only correct way to start the story about African womanhood. And to start the struggle that Onyesunwo, born from this rape, will have to live with for the rest of her life. So Onyesunwo is born from this rape. And her mother calls her Onyesunwo, which means who fears death. And this is also kind of very African concept, or something that I haven't really seen in European contexts to compare, is giving your child a name that means something, specifically means something, and that name has power in it. And it's supposed to serve as sort of a prophecy for their lives. So her mother gives her this name specifically because she knows there's going to be a struggle. She knows there's going to be a struggle of life and death and everything because of the rape, because of her birth. And she's angry from her birth. And that anger kind of is the fuel that takes her forward. So with that, and that name, and that prophecy, and everything heaped on top of her, there's also the racism in this story. They believe that children born of rape, born of violence, will be violent. And so she and her mother are kind of ostracized from society because everybody fears a child born of rape. They're going to become witches or something else. And so they fear the violence that's been done to her mother. And they fear her because she is a product of that violence. And that's again where the struggle comes from African womanhood and what it means. And this is rape done right in a story. It means something, it means everything. And we would not have had a story without it. So later on in her life, Onyesunwo find her mother, find a progressive society who still hate her for who she is and fear her for what she might become, product of violence. But they live in a city. And Onyesunwo, as an 11-year-old girl, needing to fit in because of all the racism she's experiencing and having no friends or anything, she joins the other girls to get circumcised. And I don't think I need to go into detail about what female circumcision entails. But along with that, they also get a stone that's placed under their tongues to remind the girls, you are women now and you have to watch your tongue. And just with that alone, that constant reminder, every time she screams, she's scared. Every time she gets angry. Every time she screams, she's scared that the diamond will fall out of her mouth. And with that and being circumcised, and what they do with that circumcision later, where that plotline goes. This is just another one of those things that I wanted to highlight about how well the metaphor is portrayed. It's a tradition. It's enforced. Every woman in that city has a pebble, has a diamond under her tongue to remind her that she is a woman and she needs to know her place and keep quiet. And this is a progressive society. It's just that constant pressure, that constant reminder. It's just so real and it's so... It's as if everybody there is breathing through water, through this thick mist of oppression and circumstance, but they kind of don't realize it. And then when you look on it as a sort of modern person, it's just, you can't help but feel sorry for them. And at the same time, Onyesunwa is a woman more powerful than I will ever be. If any of these ideas are resonating with you, go and read the book. I don't know how to give you a novel in a review, but I'm going to try my darndest because this book deserves it. So we have this then. We have the circumcision, we have the diamonds under their tongues. And then what the story does with that makes it even more powerful. It's different than just this constant oppression. It takes that further. It tells the story of the women who are enforcing that. Because the circumcision is done by older women. The diamonds under the tongue are enforced by older women. All of these patriarchal structures are enforced on 11-year-old girls by grown women, by women who have gone through the same. And their reasons for enforcing these laws are not because of men. It's twisted and it's messy and it's so real, but it's heavy. Broken people break people, and I think that's a theme that comes up often, especially with the women hurting each other. So then let's explore Onyesumu, our artifact of African womanhood, and her relationship to the men in her life. So the most important man would probably be Muita, and Muita is her love interest. He's kind of a bad boy at the beginning, confident, competent. He knows what he's talking about, but he's sort of mysterious. And he kind of scolds her often for her emotional outbursts. She gets angry very quickly, and he tries to tell her to keep her head even when she's angry. So he balances her out well. And especially at the beginning, it's very clear that Onyesunwa, even though she's taller than all of the men around her and she's strong and she's like this great, really artifact of womanhood, she comes into her own later. And she fights and defeats the masters who would not teach her because they fear her womb. She fights and defeats everyone who challenges her womanhood. And then there's the complicated situation of the man she loves and his dark past and how patriarchy has influenced him and her situation and how she is growing more and more powerful and how he needs to confront that the whole time. He's the man in the relationship and they have all these laws, but Onyesunwa is essentially the Messiah. How does he reconcile that and that relationship and the way they struggle with that continually? There's never like a point that Muita is just like fine and he's over his misogyny now. It's a continuous struggle of like, I should have been the powerful one. And it's messy, but it's real, and their love seems real. It doesn't seem like a relationship from a romance story. It feels more practical than that because they have a mission greater than that. And yet there is no doubt that they love each other in the truest sense. And Muita's resentment is contrasted constantly with his undying love. He's critical of her, but he's loyal to a fault. He does not leave her side when she's ailing, and he does not stand aside when she's making the wrong choices. He is a strong man next to a strong woman. There is no reason to weaken Muita's character to raise Onyesumu up. They fit together, but she is more powerful than he is, and so that bubbles up the whole time because that's not how it's supposed to be. And I think that's why Onyesunwa's story is not one of incremental change and little bit by little bit. It's not even a rebellion about people rising up. This is about a force of nature. Onyesunwa, the force of nature, the force of womanhood, obliterating what there was, destroying it entirely. And this is her story. This is who fears death. And it cannot be anyone else's. No man can take that away from her. None of her friends can take it away from her. And these concepts that I've highlighted are just some of the things that remain memorable to me. Why this character is larger than life. And why I think most of you should read this book. Should you read this book? It is 5 stars, no question about it. But you need to be prepared for heavy topics, for deep dives, for laying up at night thinking about this world and thinking about everything that it means, and to what extent we have the same, we're dealing with the same, and to what extent things could be so much worse. And at some point, the side characters are a bit lame, the plot drifts. But despite this, it's the most powerful book I've ever read. And I think for that alone, I would recommend it to anyone brave enough to try.
Well, that was no pressure at all. I wish I could just review bad books. It's so much easier than trying to live up to what an author has crafted over years and years of their lives. It's. I just hope I can kind of halfway give you guys a taste of what Who Fears Death really is and what it meant to me. Also, in my research, I found out that there's an HBO series approved for this, and George R. R. Martin is involved with the production of that. I'm nervous. I really hope they don't mess it up, but I think it probably can be done well if they're willing to put in the effort and the research and to really understand. So yeah, please let me know what you thought of this book. Let me know if you've ever heard about it, because I feel like it's a damn shame that I am 22 years old and this is the first time I'm hearing about this book. And yeah, whether you would like to read it. Thanks, Whiskers. Bye bye.